First DE begin we talk kid me fought the rose canoe shot a gwina or leacon Kilviheel Harla kid Bliano in or non. You're all heartily welcome at this Kilmichael Ambush Centenary event. My name is Pat Muldowney. Over recent years, I've participated in many history events in Cork County and City, and I'm honoured to be able to be present at this one. Our speaker tonight is Jack Lynn of the Aubane Historical Society, which is involved in publishing material about the Mill Street area, the first instance, and then generally about Irish history and politics. And is currently republishing the Irish Bulletin. This is the journal of the first Dáil in the period 1921, which includes extensive descriptions of events throughout the country. And Jack's topic tonight is the lessons of Kilmichael and reflections on the War of Independence. Sorry, look at my thoughts the Jack, but Braham will Donegal Shea Ilahar Section New Enoch. Tá Donegal in a Kahirach or Cushta Queenicon Hilvahil agus Crossabari. As Marianne Le Sean O'Kellecher agus Con O'Calchan, Yilson Schlucht the Leukra Cogan Sirsha, and Turaka, Yenshis Fishon, Iguina Ern Leocon. I would say so and Tus Fishon. Kan Fishon Umlon Eshkint, Yil Dianabak Dollis Jock, the Lehan of Facebook, the Quid Donica, out in the Will and Nosk, it's in Feather and Fishon Eshkint and Shin. Okay, Martin kind of Crinu shot a Hiola. Iram or Gonica, Kupla Fuckle or Raw doing Donica.
Remagut Peta as an Mulla. Boalom of Vicus a Goalish common stara Aubane as an Yesha Agru or son Comora Kid Blean or Lee Khan Kilvihil. Hara Pet Vixa Kahir August Jack Evegig Torton Kind and Uct. I thank the Aubane Historical Society for organising this occasion online, and especially Pat in the chair and Jack who will be giving the talk to mark the centenary of the famous Kilmichael Ambush. The Aubane Society has done Trojan work over the years in presenting us with the real history of our country's struggle for independence and defending the good name of our patriots. We in the Kilmichael and Crossbarry Commemoration Committee endeavour not only to keep alive the memories of all those who fought and died for Irish freedom, but also to promote the cause which they fought for, that of a 32-county free Ireland, which has yet to be achieved. The Northern state has been a failed entity from the outset, and the Southern state, Republic of Ireland, could never reach its full potential in a divided Ireland. The Kilmichael Ambush was a very significant event in the War of Independence, and it happened at a crucial time, and the military and political ramifications the Kilmichael Ambush had far outweighed the size of the battle itself. Within that is the nature of guerrilla warfare. We in the Kilmichael and Crossbarry Commemoration Committee are the custodians of the magnificent monuments at Kilmichael and Crossbarry with the ordinary people. And we remember the people gone before us that organised their erection in 1966 with funding from the ordinary plain people of Ireland. We are glad to say that both these monuments have recently been restored and are in tip-top shape for many more commemorations. Kilmichael still resonates with the Irish people and freedom-loving people everywhere. Gurav Mila Mahagiv.
Gurav Mila Mahagiv, Donica, Asan Rotas, Feel Creole Shin. And now I invite Jack Lane to speak to us about the lessons of Kilmichael and reflections on the War of Independence. Jack.
Well, thanks very much, Pat and Donica. Obviously, thanks, Pat. Well, it's a pleasure indeed to be contributing to the centenary commemorations of Kilmichael. I think by now, anybody who's taken an interest in the other events associated with the commemoration will realise the real importance of Kilmichael, a complete military success over the cream of the Crown forces, the auxiliaries, and more important than that, the psychological victory of Kilmichael. The first time that the auxiliaries were completely defeated, and was then an amazing morale boost to the volunteers and to people generally. What I would like to reflect on is what I might call the second ambush of Kilmichael, the effort in recent decades by our revisionist friends to give us an alternative narrative on Kilmichael. And the aim of this was to discredit Kilmichael and everything associated with it, particularly Tom Barry as a serial killer, and that the war that it was part of was a sectarian war. Now, a few people, I feel obliged to mention them, even though I hate mentioning names because there were so many involved, but a few people took who took the lead in correcting this narrative, led off by Maida Ryan, Brian Murphy, then Niall Meehan, John Regan, Padraig O'Rourke, Manus O'Riordan, Barry Keane, and others. But they countered the narrative that was being presented. The new narrative was to give us a bad conscience, not only about Kilmichael, but about the War of Independence itself. And what I think we should remind ourselves of is some of the methods used to do this, because these have a continuing influence, and we're not finished with the commemorations of the War of Independence, and we need to, these, if you like, techniques may be used again. One was the use of a lot of weasel words, such as, well, all this was a shared experience, shared historical experience. Now, it's very hard to get your head around the fact that a war can be a shared experience. And somebody made a point that it's a bit like if one of us was assaulted on the way home tonight, and our assailant turned up in court on Monday morning and said, "Oh well, Your Honour, it was all a shared experience, really." You know, he'd get short shrift. If a rapist tried to defend his raping by saying, "Oh well, it was a shared sexual experience," you know, it would be laughed out of court, metaphorically and literally. And the same should be said about this idea of a shared history. It's not a way of explaining history or an experience or a war. It's a way of explaining it away. Another great weasel word that was thrown around was, "Oh, we should be concentrating on reconciliation." Well, obviously nobody's against reconciliation. Nobody wants to restart the conflict or anything like that. But reconciliation of what with what? And the reconciliation we are promoting, and the only reconciliation we're dealing with, is the reconciliation of the facts of a situation and the facts of that war with an account or a narrative of that war, that the two complement each other, and not an account that conflicts with the facts of the case. Again, a way of trying to belittle the conflict and explain it away. Now, fortunately, this narrative is on the back foot at the moment, and I think that was caused by an event that was planned earlier this year, the commemoration of the RIC. The government planned that, as you know, back in February, I think. And there was a revolt against this, a popular revolt against it, because people instinctively thought this is going to be a step too far. Anybody who had any knowledge of the War of Independence knew the role of the RIC. They were part of the Crown forces. And another weasel word that comes in is calling them policemen. They were not policemen, never were policemen. And that was spelled out quite clearly by the government, the British government of the day, because it was proposed in March 1919 in the House of Commons that they become part of the National Union of Police and Prison Officers in the UK. And the Chief Secretary for Ireland, Macpherson, replied as follows: It was decided by the government that the Royal Irish Constabulary could not be permitted to join the National Union of Police and Prison Officers, inasmuch as the Royal Irish Constabulary is a semi-military force directly under the control of the Crown and subject in many respects to the same conditions of employment as the Army and Navy forces, March the 6th, 1919. So that's putting the situation quite clearly, calling a spade a spade. And for my sins, I wrote a letter to the Irish Times pointing this out, but obviously it wasn't published like many more. And so we were presented with this commemoration of a policeman. Now, there were decent people in the RIC, no doubt about that, but they all left en masse. They weren't being commemorated, and they should have been commemorated. They were brave men to do that. Now, and again, the RIC, being what they were crucial to the war, to the military effort. The TANs were a reserve of the RIC. The auxiliaries were a division of the RIC, and these people, these people could do nothing in the country without the RIC because they didn't know anything about the country side. They wouldn't know where to go, who to look for, who to follow up, etc., etc. So the RIC were the bloodhounds for the military effort to suppress the Dáil and the independence movement. So they were crucial. And again, this was this event was abandoned, and it contributed to the government losing the next election. Now, the episode is important because I think scales fell from eyes when people realized what was being proposed here. And after that, I think we've been able to speak more plainly about the War of Independence and the real facts of the War of Independence. Now, what's the major fact of all about the War of Independence? A major fact is that it need not have happened. And therefore, the crucial event really is the general election of 1918, where the people voted overwhelmingly for independence. 75%, about 75% of the seats went to the Independence Party. Now, even Donald Trump couldn't query that result. I don't think he would have bothered hiring any solicitors to challenge it. And the people in that voted for independence. They did not vote for war. They voted for independence. Now, why did they vote like that at that time? In such massive numbers. Well, the crucial thing was that a world war had just been fought for the freedom of small nations. As far as Ireland was concerned, that's what was used to recruit up to 250,000 Irishmen. 50,000 up to 50,000 of whom were killed, the Irish at home and abroad. Now, that affected everybody in the countryside, in the country as a whole. And people believed that. I mean, it's not, it'd be too insulting to people to think that they didn't believe what the government told them over and over again at the time. This was a fight for the freedom of small nations, which obviously all Irish people believe was the first in queue for freedom of small nations was Ireland. Now, and a thought we should give to this is that if up to 50,000 were killed, how many did all those Irish troops kill? How many Germans and Turks did they kill? Even if you give them 1 for 1, it's quite a number, hundreds of thousands maybe. So those are the type of numbers that fought, apparently, for the freedom of Ireland. Turks, who never did any harm to this country, except to the last time they intervened, as I recall, was to give money towards what's called the famine. The Germans, their scholars almost created the Gaelic revival. Yet here we were killing them for the sake, in order to obtain Irish freedom. The thing is mind-boggling when you think of it in reality. Now, a strange thing about the 1918 election, and I came across it a couple of years ago when I wanted to do something on the centenary of that, there is no book on the 1918 election. Not a single book I could come across. Hundreds, and probably now thousands of books on the War of Independence and the war and all sorts of episodes and events of the war, but no book on the vote for Irish independence. And this was confirmed a couple of years ago. UCC produced a massive book, literally a massive book, weighing in over 11 pounds, over 5 kilos. nearly 1,000 pages, introduced by President Higgins, rave reviews, prizes galore, contributions by over 100 of our historians, and it had over 160 chapter headings on various subjects. Not one chapter heading on the general election. References, of course, passing references as usual, as you'll always find. A couple of pages are there, about out of the 1,000 pages. And I thought to myself, these people just don't see the wood for the trees. You couldn't possibly do a book on the Irish War of Independence without giving that election a massive part. Now, people voted, as I said, because of what they understood the war to be about. Not only that, the Americans joined the war for the same reason. National self-determination. Woodrow Wilson's 14 points were essentially for that. So they joined the war for that. The new Russian government, the Bolsheviks, left the war to do the same thing and support the colonial struggles in the imperial, by the colonies of the imperial powers throughout the world. And these have over decades been successful, and now we have dozens and dozens of nation states arising from that. The major one, of course, being China and India. And also, another reason they voted for it was an event that's not much knowledge now. Another European country, a few years previously, wanted national independence. They voted for it and got it without firing a shot. That was Norway and Sweden. And that was considered at the time the normal civilized way of dealing with self-determination. But that was ignored. So the people naturally thought it was a case of voting for independence, and we'd get it. That it would be a walk in the park, effectively. And they were right to believe that. The whole world was for it. This massive war had been fought for it, in which in total about at least 10 million people were killed. But what was the government's reaction? The British government, the government that prided itself on being the leading democratic power in the world, and that election was the biggest democratic exercise ever in the United Kingdom, because the electorate had been extended to practically all men and most women, ignored it. And not only that, they treated it with contempt. They had no respect whatever for it. And the attitude was was spelt out by some of their propagandists, particularly a chap called Major Street. The Irish got carried away. They get these notions sometimes. They're a bit naive. They believe the propaganda they're fed, and they'll get over it. And they have good reason to think that. I see, as Street pointed out, a smack of foreign government, and they'll get up. We did it before. Don't forget the Fenians, the Young Irelanders, etc. You know, they were put down. That was it. And we'll do the same here, and it'll be all over very soon. And so when the Irish showed signs of actually supporting the government that was set up, as they were elected to do, the British government prescribed it all and hunted down the members. But then the unexpected happened. And I think it was unexpected, not only by the British, but I think by the Irish ourselves. The Irish took the result of that election seriously. And they said, no, we want the government we voted for, and we'll defend it. And very soon, citizen soldiers emerged all over the country, in the most unlikely places. And the result of 1918 was confirmed in subsequent elections. 2 local government elections, an urban and rural in 1920, gave overwhelming support to Sinn Féin, and that enabled them to take over local government from the British government. And this was getting down to the real nitty-gritty of people's lives. After another general election in 1921, where the result was even more overwhelming for Sinn Féin in Southern Ireland in 26 counties than 1918. Every single seat went to Sinn Féin uncontested. So the military defence of the Dáil, plus these continuing elections in favour of the Dáil and in favour of independence, convinced the British government that they would have to have a truce, which they agreed to in July 21. Now, this was obviously a blow, a military blow and a political blow. The British Empire, as we all know, was the greatest empire the world had ever seen, and which the sun never set. They had got that empire, they created that empire largely by very successful wars. And they were well experienced in it. And you can't build empires without being good at war. So having to concede a war to a newly formed group of people, as they thought, who they had very recently described as a mother gang, was quite a humiliation in effect. But in all their wars, the British had learned one thing: wars do not stop when the shooting stops. If the purpose isn't gained by that, and the purpose here wasn't gained, the purpose was to maintain, not to lose Ireland, as I would put it. So other techniques had to be found. Politics became the continuation of the war by other means, negotiation, etc. And they realized that the success of the War of Independence was the unity of the country and of the people and the people leading it. And it's not rocket science to know what to do if that's the key to success. Just try and destroy the unity and disrupt the unity. And that's what they set about doing. And they had a perfect man in charge to attempt that, Lloyd George, the Welsh wizard. And he was a wizard, no doubt about it. He was fit for anything. War, obviously, threats of war, promises, lies, cajolery, flattery, trickery, bluff. Lloyd George had all the talents, all these talents, and he could play them like a musical instrument. He was an artist at it, and this is what the British the Irish were faced with. There was a fellow Welshman, I believe, created a ditty about him, which I think gives the sort of the flavour of his personality. It went something like this: when it's speculated that when Lloyd George died and passed away, where he'd go, and it was downstairs. It went, Lloyd George, no doubt, when his life runs out, will ride in a flaming chariot. He'll sit in state on the right heart plate between Satan and Judas Iscariot. And on that day, the devil will say, my place of preeminence fails, so I'll move a bit higher away from the fire to make room for this fella from Wales. And that gives the flavour of what the Irish government was up against. And within 5 months, he had used all these talents to enforce an agreement called Articles of Agreement between Britain, Ireland and Britain. That was the official title. Now, and this was, he got this signed through sheer threats of more war. And the more war, immediate and terrible war, as he put it. And everybody knew what that meant at the time. It was to resort to the methods that were used in the Boer War and the South African War, which was blockhouses and concentration camps, which were invented for that purpose. Now, what was signed is called a treaty. And I think this is another weasel word. Treaty is not mentioned in this document. Nowhere in the text. Anyway. And what is a treaty? A treaty is a coming together of one of two or more states, independent states, coming together of their own free will to agree on something. There's no force involved. There's no threats involved. If it is, it's not a treaty. There's no oath of allegiance of one side to the other. And it has to be an agreement of equals. Now, Ireland was treated by the British here as a union, so they're not equal to the British Empire. The British Empire would not have treaties with its dominions. it's ridiculous. You can't have treaty with a less equal entity. So these were articles of agreement, and the word used to describe them in the text itself is their instrument. It's an instrument. And the instrument obviously was to further divide and frustrate the national effort in Ireland's side. Now, paper will never refuse ink, and we'll hear in the next year or so talk about the treaty. But there was no treaty. Now, then we were told that this posed obviously a huge problem for the Irish government. And I think it's wrong for us at this moment and in this context to be judgmental about how the government had to react to it. It was a real dilemma. And its resolution, and of course it was voted on, as we all know in Dáil, as a debate. It was a debate, simply a debate, and nothing else. The Dáil could not approve the treaty because of this article, because they did not recognise the Dáil. And of course it was passed very, very narrowly by Liam Mellors gave the reason very succinctly. He said it depended on the fear of the people, not the will of the people. Now, it led to what is called a civil war. And this, I think, is another weasel word. A civil war is between groups of people in a country who have totally different views about the future of that state. That wasn't the case here. All were Republicans, all wanted a republic. So on that very fact alone, you couldn't have had a civil war. The civil wars we know about, everybody knows about, English Civil War, American Civil War, the Spanish Civil War. In England's case, it was Puritan, Cromwellian government, parliament versus monarchy. Where in America, it was a federation of states, independent states versus a union. In Spain, it was a fascist monarchical system versus a republic. Two completely different ways of running the country. As I said, that wasn't the case here. It was a conflict of policies arising from this forced Articles of Agreement. And it was obviously it was very serious. I'm not belittling what it meant for people, and that it gave rise to a party political structure. But party political structures arise from real events and real problems, how to cope with them. But calling it a civil war also has a very important subliminal effect. The Irish, they resorted to civil war as soon as they were given an opportunity to do something together. And the fighting Irish came out, and anyway, they were into faction fighting, weren't they? And it's a way of belittling the whole episode, and keep referring to it as a civil war is a total misnomer, totally wrong. It couldn't have been a civil war. Both sides, as I said, wanted a republic. They wanted a similar type of government. They fought together to get that for 3 years, 4 years, and they eventually agreed to a republic. All agreed to a republic. So there was no civil war. You can't describe it as such, and it's part of the attempt to discredit and give us a bad conscience about our history by going on about the civil war. There was a conflict, a very serious conflict, but then states do face serious conflicts. Now I think finally, why we're really celebrating, and this is I don't like the word commemoration for Kilmichael and other events. They should be called celebrations. We're celebrating a major event in the setting up of the state. Now the state was set up originally in January 1919. It has lasted 101 years. That's a success story. We're often given the impression that we have a failed state in our hands here. The first duty of a state is to survive. And in that 101 years, there are many states and empires that have come and gone. And they've happened very recently. in the Middle East. International relations between states is dog eat dog, and to survive, that's the first duty of a state, and Ireland has succeeded in doing that. Now, in the course of doing that, it has not succumbed to totalitarianism of any sort. It has maintained a democratic system for that 101 years, despite all sorts of problems. And it avoided things like the worldwide depression and the destruction of the Second World War. Now, these are real achievements that have to be taken into account when we're trying to judge the War of Independence in the round. It gave, and I think it gave rise to this very successful state because of the overwhelming support from it at the beginning in 1918, which effectively has been maintained. Now, I said it has maintained a democratic system, and I would ask you, give you a little test, try and find out how many states have survived that length of time with an unbroken democratic system that didn't succumb to totalitarianism of any sort, was not invaded, broken up, or did not wage war in other peoples. Take that, and I think you will find them that you can count them on the fingers, maybe not of one hand, but certainly of two. Now, the state obviously was faced with all the usual problems that states are faced with. They were dealing with millions of human beings and human nature. And being where it was, there were all sorts of problems, continuing problems, corruption, scandals, and economic problems, etc. And they're ongoing, and every state has them. This state, I would suggest, has dealt with them as good or as bad as any other state. But the crucial thing is it has survived, maintained itself, has not been broken up, has defended itself when necessary, and as I said, avoided massive problems that other countries were not able to cope with, the Great Depression, the Second World War, all the destruction that entailed. So I think that's the perspective that we should look on when commemorating, celebrating Kilmichael and other ambushes and events in our War of Independence. We should not we should realize the weasel words that will be used in the rest of these commemorations, like this business of a treaty that we fought that there was a treaty. There wasn't a treaty. There wasn't a civil war. There was intimidation and force to continue the War of Independence, the war against independence. That's what it was. The war did not end when the shooting stopped. So I think that's why it gives me a pleasure to be part of this commemoration, because we are commemorating, in effect, a very successful state that Kilmichael helped to found. Thanks very much.
Jack, if there's one thing to remember from what you said, it's the necessity to deal objectively and honestly and realistically with the events of the War of Independence. I can't pick out all the nuggets, but I can think of what the Home Secretary was, it Macpherson, who judged that the Royal Irish Constabulary was a police force. It was a military force subject to the head of the military, which was the King of England.
Yeah.
And of course, another thing that you mentioned is that the people were united in the 1918 election. They were united in the local elections of 1920. They were united in the general election of 1921. The real issue there was how could they be made disunited? The war of terror to suppress them by the unelected governing power wasn't working, so that they couldn't be broken that way. So the means of breaking them was by the Welsh wizard Lloyd George, who did break that unity. So anyway, in that spirit of realism, I'd like to put a question to you. As you say, a majority of the people voted for independence in 1918, and when the unelected governing power embarked on a violent terror campaign to break them, they resisted. But now we go forward to 2 years in 1922, a majority of the elected representatives of the people voted to accept the Articles of Agreement, the so-called treaty. What's the significance?
Yeah, how do you explain that? Yeah. Well, yeah, and how do you explain that change? Sorry. Yeah. Well, obviously that vote, as I said, I think I mentioned there was a debate on the Articles Agreement. Now, everybody could and did debate it, and that's all they could do. That's the first thing to write. The Dáil could not approve the Articles Agreement. That was written into the agreement. If you agreed with the Articles Agreement, you were not accepting the Dáil. You were abolishing it, because it spells it out very clearly. I think it's in the last clause number 18. It says, this can be approved by the government of Southern Ireland. Now, the government of Southern Ireland was not the Dáil. The government of Southern Ireland was what was put to the people in a vote in June, I think, 1921, the one that set up partition. And not a single person in Southern Ireland, in the 26 counties, voted for that government. But now the members of the Dáil were asked to approve an act, the act of the government of Ireland, and approve that government. And after the vote in the Dáil, the people who won the vote had to traipse over to Dublin Castle and become the government of Southern Ireland and meet the Lord Lieutenant and say, we've approved the treaty under that British Act of Parliament. That's the first thing to realise. And I think, as I mentioned, what was overwhelming in that debate was Lloyd George's threat of renewed and terrible war. That's what was in everybody's mind. That's quite clear when you read the debate. Now, I think that a debate and a parliament acting under that has no moral authority. I mean, fundamental issues are not decided by the mathematical difference of a few votes. There are more important things at stake. And what was at stake was what they had versus a renewed war against the Dáil and the independence movement. So I think that vote was technically just a debate, as if anybody else had debated it. It had no authority to accept or reject the Articles Agreement. So it was all based on a sort of a fraud. They could not approve it. So I think that wasn't a debate, that wasn't a parliamentary debate in any normal sense. It wasn't the Dáil of its own free will deciding something. They were under the threat of war, and no matter what they did, they had to become something else to approve what they were discussing. The Articles Agreement, that could only be approved under the Government of Ireland Act. And they had to become this farcical Government of Ireland that nobody ever voted for a few months previously, because that election result was even more overwhelming in many ways than 1918. Not a single person in Southern Ireland, 26 counties, voted for that government. The only people that could make it up were 4 appointed people from Trinity College. It was a joke. So I think that's the context that we have to see that Dáil debate. it was literally a debate and nothing else, that the Dáil itself had no authority, legal authority, to approve or disapprove.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
We must keep in mind that there has been hostile propaganda about the War of Independence for the past 100 years, and that's not going to stop today or tomorrow. Anyway, I think we can close the meeting at this point. Thanks to our speaker, Jack Lynn, and thanks to everyone for participating at this notable point in time, 100 years plus 3 or 4 hours since the momentous event at Kilmichael that we're commemorating.
Okay.
Míle buchas de gach éineann seo go háirithe don cainteoir Jack Lynn, agus míle buchas a coiste cuineachán Kilmha Híl agus Cross Barrig as a níogras chun an tradiisiún seo a chuimhnú agus a chothú íomhá a gcuibh go léir. Okay, so I'll be editing now, like.
Right.
So you're happy enough with that?
Yeah, oh, I'm fine, but the annoying thing is that I could see none of that.
I know. Yeah, but I'm not saying that I wouldn't think that there's any harm.
No, good.
Because
good,
I mean, I
good.
think it might have been. I know it's annoying for you, but you see the recording. We can always do it again if you wish. There's no problem.
No.
I think I know how to edit. One thing is though, your microphone was kind of fading a little bit occasionally, not enough to make any difference to the whole thing. You know? I'm just saying, like, as a point.
Oh yeah, good.
To remember,
good,
you know.
good. I think also I've got a bad habit. I think of moving my head too much. You know.
No, Jack. And I was watching all that. Like, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That didn't affect you. It was quite natural. I mean, what worried me slightly was that I was aware that you can't see yourself in the screen.
Yes.
And therefore I thought maybe you're going to move off screen. I started exerting my kind of highly developed powers of. But no, it happened. It's all stayed in focus. Everything was good.
Yeah.
You know? So,
I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. I watched the Niall Meehan event.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of problems like that. Most of the people were all blanks. You couldn't see them. Obviously, they hadn't got around to switching on their videos.
Yeah, that's right.
So we weren't alone in that problem, and it's a bit weird because they had quite a lot of people. I suppose they must have had 30, 40 people.
But we had 23.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
Well,
enough, you know.
Yeah, they had about as much more, but they were obviously better. They had more context and all that. But the thing is, most of the people there had the same problem. And like, for instance, your man Sean Kelleher was there, but he was there as Roisin Kelleher and things like that. And
Well, I think that's who owns the. I think that he's probably have daughter Roisin coming in to fix them up, you know. So, and the other thing is, you see, we only barely got this out and as an advertised thing a couple of days, like, you know, really. Whereas the Niall Meehan's thing was on the cards there for weeks, if not months, you know. Do you know what I mean? So they had it planned like that, you know. So I think it didn't do too bad, like, in that respect.
Great. Well, you work away on it, and when you have it put together, let us have a copy.
I managed to dig out an editor, which I think will do the trick, which will allow me to edit stuff out and to splice things together. This morning's one and the previous one. Okay, Jack. So bear in mind. I hope you will. Create a YouTube channel or something like that, where you can sling stuff into. Do you know what I mean? As necessary. Then you see it's just there. Maybe 2 or 3 people might look at it, but in the longer run, you see, you'll advertise it and take note of it. People go along to see it. Okay, Jack.
Yeah. Okay, Grant. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.